Good afternoon, and thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I appreciate the invitation for MAGIC. It's my first time in Norway, so I took the invitation once we were allowed to travel. I was like, yes, I will come and see what Norway is like. So even though I'll be here for 3 days, it's a privilege to be here and also to be at this hospital. I was touched by the story at the beginning, so thank you for introducing the hospital to me. And it also reminded me of the hospital where I trained and worked earlier on in my career, which was the public hospital in San Francisco. So San Francisco General Hospital, which serves a similar community. So I'm happy to be here. So on behalf of WHO, I'm going to present a little bit about our experience writing living guidelines for COVID-19. And in that, maybe echo some of the previous speakers' points and also highlight some of the work with MAGIC. So let's see. What can I say? We have developed our therapeutics living guideline using MAGIC app and in collaboration with the MAGIC team as our methodological support team. And with that, we have had, thank you, the following. So 6 updates since the September 2020 to September 2021. We've had 6 updates of our therapeutics guideline. And so I just want to preface, I'm going to speak about the therapeutics as the example, but we actually have a comprehensive clinical management guideline as well. That's also published in the MAGIC app. We have recommendations for 7 drugs, and we do publication in 3 simultaneous platforms. One is the WHO platform, which is on the right there, which is our PDF. The PDF actually is made automatically from the MAGIC app publication platform that's in the middle. And on the left, we have a collaboration with BMJ where we publish our living guidelines, as has already been discussed. So this all you can find on our website. As you've heard before, traditionally living guidelines, clinical guidelines, especially at WHO, have taken quite a bit of time to develop. In the past, they may have taken 1, 2, 3, potentially 5 years to go through that long process. And as colleagues already explained, then that can, by the time the guideline gets out, it already needs to be updated and is outdated. So we obviously could not do that for COVID-19. So we needed to be nimble, flexible, at the same time, transparent and trustworthy. And so right now we have a timeline of 8 to 10 weeks from full data availability to guideline publication. And here I've simplified in 5 steps the way we approach this, but I do this because I have to present on a regular basis how we're writing our guidelines in a very complex scientific environment and a lot of stakeholders that are pending to hear what WHO is going to say about certain drugs. So step 1, we have a therapeutic steering committee. I will discuss, I just wanted to describe that for you. That means we have WHO staff. We have 6 regional offices scattered around the world. We have staff members at each regional office represented in our therapeutic steering group. We have multiple departments across WHO. I'm in the health emergencies program, so I do outbreak response work, but we have the group that works on medicinal health products, pre-qualification, essential medication lists, maternal child health, so many different stakeholders around WHO, and we convene them as a therapeutic steering committee. There's probably about 25 members of that, more or less. Step 2 is meta-analysis and grade. As you guys already know, you've heard, we have 2 main systematic reviews that we use to inform our guidelines. One is a living network meta-analysis from colleagues at McMaster's, and the other is a prospective meta-analysis approach, which I'll discuss briefly in the next few slides. We have a guideline development group. That's a standing group of international experts in clinical medicine. As WHO, we provide public goods for our member states. So it is important at a global level that we have representation from all regions of the world. So you'll see in our guideline development group, we have clinicians from every region representing different specialties, similar to how the colleague from Australia was describing, different specialties represented, different temporary advisors come in if we need a certain high-level specialty advice into the guideline development group. We have 4 patient panel members that participate in the guideline development group. We have an ethicist who's part of the group. And so in total, we have about 40 members. Not all of them attend all the meetings, but we do have a kind of a standing panel approach so that we can convene on a regular basis to review evidence and prioritize PICOs, et cetera. Recommendation writing, the guideline development group is the writing panel for the recommendation. So WHO doesn't write the recommendation. It's the guideline development group that writes the recommendation for us. That recommendation is drafted and then reviewed. We have a series of external reviewers, as well as external peer reviewers, I guess is a better description. Those are usually implementation partners or people who are in the field using the guidelines. We are using actually a couple of NGOs that are working in some of the more limited resource settings to be reviewers for us. We have a guideline review committee, which is also a combination of WHO staff that's not involved in the guideline development process, as well as external experts. And then it goes through that review process, and then finally publication, of which I've already described to you some of the publication platforms we are using. But if you can see I'm trying to make a new slide and I haven't succeeded yet in how I wanted to look at, but I wanted to show the complexity of this. So the 5 steps actually requires a massive amount of coordination. So if you look here now, we have the steering committee, which I described. We have the meta-analysis team and the LNMA team from McMaster's. I don't know how many people they have, maybe 40, 50 people. As an example, the method support team, which is the MAGIC support team that we're collaborating with as well, has many people. How many people? 10. I'm going to do the guideline development group already has about 40 people. The guideline review committee probably has around another 10 people, the external peer reviews. And so as you can start to see, there's a lot of stakeholders and collaborators that are necessary in order to make this happen. And then when we go to publication, we have a WHO website team, all this stuff happening at the WHO. We have a communications group. So all those things about communication, what the Director General will say at a press conference, to what we will tweet at WHO, to what we will do on LinkedIn. And then of course, the collaboration with BMJ to get the guideline into the public space. This is a highly complex process that we've had to coordinate. And so I just say project management is essential to make this happen. Our evidence synthesis, we learned, obviously need to be updated on a living approach. There was no other alternative, right? We needed to be living and we couldn't rely on things that were stagnant. And so there we have the living network meta-analysis that I think Thomas showed on the left. So then again, that being one of our primary sources of evidence synthesis for our guidelines. And then 2 examples of JAMA articles on prospective meta-analysis technique that we used to look at the evidence for corticosteroids and IL-6 receptor blockers. And that was important for us to do because there were so many ongoing clinical trials and we wanted to be able to synthesize evidence before the publications were even in preprint. And so the novel approach we took to do that was to do a prospective analysis working with the clinical trialists in order to get better timelines on when data would be available, so then we can synthesize evidence faster. So what did we learn? A lot of preprints. So before COVID-19, we didn't write guidelines on preprints, as far as I know. We waited for peer review, we waited for someone else to take a look and say it was a good trial, but now that's no longer the case. So we do trust preprints, and that's, you know, with its own risks, I guess. We do get data shared with us before publication, even before preprints. So WHO does engage through confidentiality agreements with trialists and also with pharmaceutical companies when we know that there's data available. They haven't yet put it into the public space, but they have full study results. And so we have a collaboration that way in order to get the data, of which then we can share in confidence to the meta-analysis team in order to start the evidence synthesis. And but just to note here, even if we get data before it's in the public space, by the time the guideline gets published, we do expect that that data at least be in preprint so that anyone who's using our guideline can reference the primary data source in trial. So the formatting of my slides got a little bit confused. So there's many things we have learned. So I think with each drug, even though we tried to make this as process-oriented and as methodologically rigorous, which we have, but that has allowed us actually to learn new things with each drug that we've evaluated in the process. And I just want to highlight some examples because I think it's interesting. Methodological considerations, we always go back to the values and preferences. Do we need to relook at this for every new drug? And it's important, right? Because you're making judgments, recommendations based on values and preferences. Rethinking outcome prioritization. What's important at this point for the severe patient? What's important for the mild patient? So in order to have an eye, whether or not we need to adjust. Calculating baseline risks over time. This has been a good, important learning, right? Like what was the baseline risk of an outcome of mortality at the beginning of the pandemic in those first the big corticosteroid recovery trial versus what is it now? And then looking at results from platform trials. So we all acknowledge that, the platform trial approach has been an incredible advancement in science and research, and the ability to test multiple interventions at a large scale. But at the same time, it has complexities as to when you want to include that into the systematic review to make sure that you have the right numbers of who's being compared to who, because it changes over time in those studies. Mechanistic considerations. So we do spend time thinking about mechanisms as well, especially for these novel drugs. And I raise this now because of the new news about the two new investigational oral antivirals. But we need to look at safety profiles, which we do as adverse events that are reported in clinical trials, but not everything is reported in clinical trials. Especially for the newer drugs, we don't know that perhaps there may be theoretical risks that can be seen and not measured yet in clinical trials. How about resistance, the issue of resistance? How about dose response, variability of dosing, PK data? When we looked at ivermectin, I remember many discussions there because there were so many different doses of ivermectin being used in those trials. So it was a little bit messy to try to sort that through in order to do a proper analysis. And so we spent quite a bit of time discussing those things. Clinical considerations, pre-specifying if drugs can be part of a class effect. We learned that when we looked at the IL-6 receptor blockers. Is it going to be sarilumab and tocilizumab, or are we going to look at them separate? Same discussion for the JAK inhibitors. Pre-specify, are the drugs going to be working together, or are there going to be alternatives? What is our hypothesis? And then the subgroup effects. At the beginning, we were looking at all patients, and we still do look at all patients, but knowing that some patients, some drugs are going to be more effective earlier on in the disease, and others potentially later on in the disease, and that has panned out with the immunomodulatory effects in the severe critical and the antiviral potential impacts in the less severe. Oops. So just an example here. In the context of WHO, I do want you to see kind of the complexities of which we're working under. The press release by Merck caused a lot of stir at the WHO, as it has in the media, a lot of buying of member states of this drug, a lot of when is WHO going to write a recommendation. So that obviously we had already been in discussions to receive that data and also data from 3 other trials that were ongoing in India. And we did, and just putting some dates here, on the first, that was the press release. On the 22nd, we held our GDG. We received on the 5th of November the trial data from a total of 4 trials. And now it's going under meta-analysis for a meeting that we hope we can have by the 8th of December. At the same time, we're dealing with access. So I don't deal with the access issues, but my colleagues at a different department deal with access, pre-qualification, regulatory issues. And that has to go in parallel. Because in the case that we do write a recommendation for this new drug, that pathway has to be in place for member states. We also, other colleagues at WHO, working with companies to create equitable access to medicines in low, middle income countries, pharmacovigilance teams to put into plans, pharmacovigilance programs for countries if we were to introduce a new drug. And then at the bottom, you can see the community and the hospital, but this is the development of tools for frontline workers, communication messages for stakeholders, donors, member states, and communication products for community members, patients, and families. The last 2 slides, I think. So going back, so where do we publish our guidelines? Again, here's just a little look at our guidelines. If you go to our website, you can click on this link, and that will actually link you into the MAGIC app, and then you can see the MAGIC app recommendation. To the left, you can see the infographic that was already shown, and to the right, another type of infographic to support clinical use. I actually like the MAGIC app myself. I think it's nice the way the end user experience of it, and the way you're able to show what may be perceived as complex concepts, such as relative effects and absolute effects and baseline risk in a simplified way. And I think we do need to make that an important message on how to train clinicians around the world on how to use evidence-based medicine, and potentially with these sorts of infographics and these sorts of messages, we can start to share that information and that approach. We also have a series of other dissemination products, a toolkit, which will have administration materials in it, and as well as a course online, which is called Open WHO, that will discuss therapeutics that hopefully we'll publish before the end of the year. My simple conclusions, I do think living guidelines are here to stay. I think we've learned a tremendous amount in this process, and I really emphasizing that the ecosystem is complex, but with transparent and trustworthy processes, there is space for agility, flexibility, without compromising quality. And I think that's what brought us together with the colleagues at MAGIC. where I think we fundamentally believe in that thing, that we can do this, that we can be agile, we can be partners, but we believe in quality, right? But it does, so, and the final comment is just tremendous collaboration. I'm very grateful for all the partnerships we've made directly with everyone who's involved in the guideline, as well as with all the people that are depending on this guideline or waiting for this guideline, and all the member states that we hope do find value in the guideline and work to implement. I didn't say a phrase here about implementation, and this I think will be the core piece of work that we try to advance on next year, is actually adaptation at national levels, because we haven't measured it in a very scientific way at WHO, and implementation. So we look forward to that sort of work, and thank you.